with the technical. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the North and East Plans panel. My name is Councillor Caroline Gruen, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that we're holding this meeting in a way that is COVID secure and in accordance with social distancing guidelines, which means everyone present is appropriately spread out and has been allocated a specific seat. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council's YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. The North and East Plans panel deals with applications from the North East and East of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. Before I begin, could I inform members that the health and safety guidance we've received from council officers recommends that meetings should be concluded within 90 minutes. So whilst I do not suggest that we curtail debate, could I ask members to just bear this in mind when we come to discuss the substantive item on the agenda. And a final reminder, even though this is our second meeting in person, you will have to actually raise your proper hand if you wish to speak. And could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and then mute your microphone when you've done that. So I have already introduced myself. If we could go to my left, Councillor Nash first and then round the table, please.
Elizabeth Nash, representing Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Councillor Sharon Hamilton. I'm subbing today for Councillor Flint, and I represent Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Councillor Al Garthwaite. I'm also a substitute today and I represent Headingley, Hyde Park and Woodhouse Ward.
Afternoon, I'm Councillor Sharp and I represent the Temple News and Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Morel Midgley, Paxton Methley Ward.
David Jones, the team leader for East Team in Planning Services.
Good afternoon, Councillor Graham Latty. I'm substituting for Councillor Ryan Stevenson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Alan Lamb, representing Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Debbie Oldham from Governance Services, Clerk to the panel.
Pippa Plumtree Varley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to the panel today.
Good afternoon, David Newbury. I'm the Lead Planning Officer for the Plans panel.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Good afternoon, Catherine Chimuli, Highways Officer.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Senior Technical Officer.
I think that's everybody. Okay, thank you for introducing yourselves and for being here this afternoon. And we'll move straight to item 1.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or the public. Item 3, there are no late items of business. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests?
Yes, Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Chair. I have a non-pecuniary interest in item 7 on the agenda regarding the change of use for Hopewell Mill. I'm actually one of the ward councillors for that area, and as one of the councillors, I have put an objection in for that application, so I don't feel it'd be appropriate for me to take any further part in that particular item.
Thank you very much for that. That's been noted and received. Does Councillor Midgley have to actually leave the room, or can she be here during the debate, please, Debbie?
As far as I'm aware, I think she needs to leave the room.
That's okay, Councillor Midgley. As you wish. We'll come and get you. You might have quite a long wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, we received apologies for absence from Councillors Almas, Flint and Stevenson. And in attendance today as substitute members, we have Councillors Garthwaite, Hamilton and Latte. Thank you.
Could I first of all thank those councillors for substituting this afternoon. It's an extra job for you, and I appreciate the fact it's quite a lengthy one too. Thank you. So if I take item 6 next, which is the minutes of the last meeting, and I will take both accuracy and matters arising together, starting on page 5 of your packs as the first page. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Oops, and page 10. And the final page, page 11. And I haven't seen any indications, so can I take that as an accurate record, please? Thank you. Thank you. So we can proceed to item number 8, change of use of the light industrial office and construction of the 2-storey front and first floor extensions. Matters arising. Sorry, I said I'd do matters arising together. My apologies. Could I take matters arising, please? Are there any matters arising? Yeah, it's a habit of mine. I do tend to take matters and accuracy together. My apologies if that wasn't understood. So we can now move to the substantive item, item 8, please. Why do I keep saying? I think my script's wrong. That's why. Because it's wrong on my script. I apologise. Item 7.
Sorry, Chair, that's my fault.
Thank you, Chair. This is a change of use application from industrial offices to essentially a residential recovery care home in Hopewell Mill, Kippax. Just before we go into the presentation, I think I'll just, if I could draw members' attention to page 26, and I'll just talk through a couple of the local landmarks because they're referenced both in the report and also the representations. So the site is centred there, it's identified, and you can see that Hopewell Terrace itself is a cul-de-sac. This is sort of the only commercial use really within that particular cul-de-sac. The rest are residential. And you can just see to the west is Kippax Methodist Church, and that's accessed off Chapel Lane, so it's separate. And then beyond that is St Mary's Church, which is the Grade 1 listed building. They're not shown on the plan, but there's actually quite a significant tree screen in between the St Mary's Church and the Methodist Church. So you'll see from the report, we don't think there's any issues in terms of setting. And also the local primary school is referenced in some of the representations, and there are some access routes to that, albeit not through Hopewell Terrace itself. So that's to the north, that's Kippax Tree Primary School. So just moving on to the presentation proper, as it were. Can we have the first slide, please, Toby? So this is the site plan. And you can see on the plan to the left, essentially those are the existing buildings, and they're in the U shape and they're towards the end of the cul-de-sac. Unusually, it looks on plan form like the curtilage extends into the road, and you'll see some photos about that, but it is actually within the applicant's ownership. So that red line boundary is correct. It just looks slightly strange, and that's confirmed by the photos. Can we have the next slide, please? So that's a view looking back down Hopewell Terrace towards the High Street. So you can see the co-op just in the distance there. And you can pick up that there's double yellow lines. So it's quite a tight, narrow access into the cul-de-sac, but it's protected by yellow lines currently. Next slide, please. So these are just some views of the front, really. Tried to fit the whole of the property in just to give you a sense of the U shape that it takes. You can see there's a combination of two-storey elements with single-storey linkages between them. And the image on below, I think the boundary treatment's now actually a higher timber fence, and that's picked up in one of the later photographs. Next slide, please. So if you were just looking at your plan, page 27, just to reference the particular views here really, because it's relevant to the neighbouring properties. So the photograph on the left-hand side is actually taken from the direction of number 17. So you can just see that it's largely a gable, blank gable there. There is one window facing towards number 17, but it's over the front garden area. And in terms of what that window would be used for in the conversion, it just serves a landing area. And the photograph on the right-hand side is number 21. And just on the plan that you're looking at, in terms of the papers, it doesn't really show that actually number 21 has been extended right the way up to the boundary. So it's actually adjoining that property now, but the rendered gable end is essentially faces towards number 21. So those are two fairly important views. So ultimately there's no windows in that elevation currently, and there isn't to be any as part of the conversion works. Next slide, please. So these are views from the rear, which is Chapel Lane. You can just pick out on the top picture towards the left, there's a bit of the car park that serves the Methodist Church. But there again, you can pick up the fact that it's a range of two-storey and single-storey buildings. There's various openings that will be reintroduced. Next slide, please. So this plan really just picks out the layout within the site. You can see that there's 6 parking spaces there, including a disabled bay. There's a service waiting area, and there's a small outdoor terraced area. And the next slide should show in more detail the actual floor plans. So next slide, please. So in terms of the floor plans, on the left-hand side of that picture are mostly the communal rooms in terms of kitchen, dining, lounge type area, meeting space, and some back of house, office accommodation and staff room, etc. And then the rest of the floor is given over to bedrooms. So you should be able to pick out, each bedroom has its own ensuite facility. They've all got access to at least one window, so natural light and ventilation, etc. And it's a similar layout on the first floor. Next slide, please, Toby. The exception being it's exclusively residential accommodation, so rooms, purely it's bedrooms on this particular floor. Also to note, there is a lift serving all the floors, and then there's one more floor. Next slide, please. And that just serves a meeting room, a meeting space. So again, the lift would go all the way to that floor. And essentially, the room is provided within the roof space, but it's served by quite a sizable dormer to provide additional headroom within that space. Next slide, please. So in terms of plans, this is the front elevation. The top image is the main image. The one below is just a section through it. So I guess the thing to point out on that particular one is that the central area is essentially that single story at the moment, and that would be built up to 2-story. And then where there's a large format opening window on the ground floor, sort of bifolding doors type arrangement, that would form part of the new extension, which is fairly minor, and there's some 3D images that will show that a bit more clearly. in terms of existing and proposed. So next slide, please. So that's an image looking as if you were at number 21, so referring back to those particular properties. So again, that just highlights really in the top plan that elevation broadly stays the same. The bit that's greyed out, that is currently single story, goes to 2-story, but that's where number 21 itself is already. And the image below is within the central courtyard. So that picks up on the dormer and the alterations proposed to the fenestration of the property. There are actually some existing archways, and the proposal is to reinstate them. Next slide, please. So this is an image back from number 17 this time. So the bottom image is the one that faces towards number 17. So again, it's just the one window in the side which is existing, and that would just serve a landing, and it's forward of the main house, so we don't think there's necessarily any overlooking issues there. Next slide, please. And this is just an image from Chapel Lane to the rear, and essentially it shows that there would be additional openings relative to those currently in the building, but they face towards the Methodist church, or mostly its car park. So we don't have any particular issues with them. In terms of the design of the extensions, it's very much the changes to the existing buildings are kept minimal, and the red brick is retained. But where extensions are proposed, it's very much to contrast. So it's rendering and quite a contemporary design, which you'll see from the 3D images that are coming up. Next slide, please, Toby. So this is just an image as existing. So again, you can pick out the sort of form of the development there. And next slide, please. And again, that's existing just from a different angle. And the proposals are now coming up. Next slide, please. So again, this is just really to highlight the main changes are the single story elements become 2-story, and they take off a bit of that front projection and replace it with a flat roof 2-story fairly modest front extension in a contemporary design, and there's a dormer window proposed. Just to highlight, that particular dormer window is as originally submitted, but that's actually been revised, so it's more glazing is now actually proposed in terms of the elevations than are depicted on that particular image. And as officers, we felt that was more appropriate because it just gives it a more lightweight appearance. Next slide, please. And again, that's just another image from a slightly different direction. Just in terms of updates for the report, we have received one additional representation from a resident. It does raise similar issues that have been flagged already, but this is a new neighbour comment, so I will just briefly highlight. Again, it references the availability of alcohol nearby and also the junior school, and suggests that is that tension, bearing in mind the nature of the use proposed. Considers the building would be better used as a youth centre, and also suggests that there's been various issues with the alleyways in the area where people are being mugged, and the concern being that this will only add to that problem. There have also been additional highway comments received, responding in part to some of the representations that have been received. So it is now proposed to introduce a further condition relating to the control of on-street parking, details to be submitted and approved by the council. So we are recommending a further condition. And you'll see from the representations, there's quite a few concerns flagged about parking in particular. The highlights from the report, very briefly, the use, it's a 16-bed C2 use, and you'll see from the site history in 2017, there's a plan and permission for a care home, also 16 beds, that was approved. Essentially, the main difference between this proposal and that approved scheme is the nature of the occupants, albeit there's no change in terms of use, and some elevational and floor space changes in the form of the dormer window really, and the use of a second floor for that meeting space. In terms of the layout and design, as I've mentioned, it's largely the same as the approved scheme that's been, from what we understand, partly implemented. And it obviously goes for a contrast in design in terms of the new elements. Highway issues have been flagged as a concern, but highway officers consider the provision of 6 spaces to be adequate. The type of use proposed is actually very low key, relatively speaking, and it falls within the C classes, so it's residential. And highway officers are also proposing an extra condition. And in terms of residential amenity, which is flagged in representations, including those by the ward members, we do feel that it doesn't represent overdevelopment. The room sizes themselves are acceptable, and they've all got adequate access to natural light and ventilation. There's a number of communal rooms that are proposed, and that includes some outdoor space. We don't see there being particular issues regarding privacy for the neighbours. So although it's quite a small cul-de-sac, separation distances still accord with those in neighbourhoods for living. So on that basis, we're recommending approval subject to that additional condition. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And so I'll open the debate by asking if there are any questions, members, to officers. Yeah, I've got Councillor Anderson and then Councillor Latty. And thank you.
Thank you. Number correct one. If you take paragraph 2 on page 14 of our document to begin with, to all intents and purposes, you're saying this is the same, you know, that this is, you know, that under, if this wasn't requested by members, this is just someone who's wanting to amend slightly an existing application that's been approved. So if you then go on to paragraph 3, where it states, it should however be noted that the elevational treatment differs between the 2017 permission and the current proposal, and accordingly this current application is required. It's noted that even if the previous permission were not extant, there have been no material changes to the site or its contextual circumstances which indicate a different decision now be made. So that to me, so what I'm asking is, in that respect, if they were to implement the 2017 permission, can they just put in a small amendment because it's non-material to do what they're wanting to do anyway? That's question number 1. And secondly, when the 2017 was approved, were the highways issues about the internal movements raised and discussed and debated at that time and found to be acceptable when the 2017 one was approved? Because I do have concerns about the narrowness of the turning movements within the, but if it's already been approved in 2017, then I shouldn't be arguing that point, because that's already been agreed by plans panel that that is acceptable. And then the final thing is, if we were to turn this down today and they went to appeal, there wouldn't be many grounds to actually defend this on, because we've got the 2017 extant application, and by your own words, the changes that they're making aren't material. So can you explain why there is even the possibility we could turn it down? Because surely on appeal we would lose hands down.
Okay, taking them in order. I think reference to non-material amendments is probably not the word to use. What we're saying in paragraph 2 or 3 about the elevational changes, I think the point we're saying is they are material. To come back to your general point, the issue is they could occupy this building through the 2017 permission as a recovery centre, and they could potentially put in a separate application for the changes. I guess the point is they haven't progressed that far, so they've just put an application in for everything again. So the main changes do require planning permission because it's a new dormer, it's quite a sizable, there's an extra floor. So we would say that is material. Moving on to the highway issues, broadly speaking, the layout, both internally and in terms of the forecourt area, is pretty much the same. I think there may have been 7 parking spaces on the 2017 permission, as opposed to the 8. But it did include a service waiting area, because the issues that are being flagged now, excepting those that are relating specifically to the recovery element of the use, all the concerns about highways, parking being difficult, it's quite difficult to turn, etc. They were all raised in the 2017 permission. Highway officers considered the application, considered that you can get in and out of it acceptably, and that the level of parking is required. What I would say is they've probably gone a bit further now on this current application with the suggestion that we add an extra condition. And I think in part that will hopefully go a bit further towards addressing the various concerns that have been raised. On the last point regarding appeal, I think ultimately it's members' decision how they want to sort of run with the application. I guess what we're saying is, well, this is very similar to the 2017 application, both physically and in terms of the use. So that translates to the impact being very similar as well. So whilst members could, if they were minded to, refuse the application, I think the message from officers is we might struggle to defend that. I say no more than that, but obviously we would seek to if that was the decision.
You're happy with those answers? Okay. I've just got one practical question to follow up on Councillor Anderson's query before I bring other members in. I've never, or in my experience, very, very, very few residents, if any, of elderly care homes drive. Is that circumstance likely to be changed under the current proposal for residents?
From the information, in terms of assessing this application and in light of the representations that have been received specifically about parking, etc., we did ask for additional information about staffing numbers and how the use would sort of operate. From the information we've received back, the suggestion is essentially it will only be staff that are there, that are parking. And I guess, and it's mentioned in the report, with a care home use, you do often get potentially visitors, whereas the indication on this particular type of use is that doesn't necessarily happen. And if it does happen, it's by exception through prior arrangement. And in part, the reason for the extra condition would be to look into those arrangements, to put measures in place to make sure that on-street parking didn't become a particular difficulty.
Thank you for that. Councillor Latty.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Looking at the drawing on page 27, the car park appears to have one gate for both pedestrian and vehicle entrance. I just wonder whether that is a particularly safe way of accessing the car parking. And you say that in actual fact, the extent of the red line is on the owners of the property. It's there anyway, that is their boundary anyway. But is it necessary? Have they demonstrated it's necessary to go out that far? Because we're narrowing the cul-de-sac by half its width at the top end. I just wonder whether that is acceptable in your terms, and have highways not commented on that at all, because it does look, well, to me, it doesn't look a safe or a good way of doing things.
Yeah, Toby, could you roll back some of the photos, please? Oh, I haven't got the numbers in front of me. If you roll back to the one that shows the front of, it'll be one of the first photographs.
Slide 5.
Sorry, I haven't got
I'm being advised.
Yeah, so just coming back to your point, Councillor Latty, you can see from that the bottom photograph that historically it's all been bollarded off already. So the narrowing of the road is a historic matter, and it does look quite strange on plan form, but in the actual cul-de-sac, it's been like that for many years. So in that context, and understandably, the applicant is looking to utilise all of their land, and I guess it's this conflict between they also want to provide adequate parking for their own use. So if you were to lose some of that space, you would lose some of their parking. You'd also lose some of their external sort of terraced area, which has been flagged as an issue from the ward members in terms of there not being enough external space. So in that context, we haven't sought to reduce the size of the applicant's site, as it were, for the benefit of the wider residents, because it's an existing situation. Yes, it's tight, but that's the reality already. So in terms of the gate, I think the details that are shown on the plan aren't fully helpful in that respect, because what we are proposing to do is, and the images, the 3D images suggest that there's a wall all the way around that particular area. Now, actually, you wouldn't then be able to get to access those parking spaces. So the condition that we're recommending as part of the recommendation, which is number 5, would look to ensure that the access gates, etc., are in a sensible place. Was the concern about where the main entrance to the building is in terms of access?
It was just that pedestrians and vehicles share one gated entrance. It would have seemed to me more sensible to have separate access for pedestrians.
Yeah, I think the reality is on this particular site, in the context of utilising existing buildings and everything being quite tight, there isn't enough space to provide a separate one. So I guess it's the same in many car parks and supermarket car parks, that pedestrians just have to be mindful of that. I guess when you look at the use, it's going to be staff parking and the visitors, and the suggestion is that there won't really be that many visitors, and I guess the vehicle movements associated with staff shouldn't be that significant in their own right.
We do have Mr. Bailey, the architect, with us, I think, this afternoon. If it would help to have a word perhaps from Mr. Bailey on that issue. Would you, could you come to the available microphone, please? Debbie will show you. Would you like to comment on the question that you've just heard, please?
Yeah, I was just speaking with the client. I mean, we'd be more than happy to provide a separate pedestrian access if you know, if you thought that was necessary, no problem. And regarding the cul-de-sac, that's the actual boundary of the site, and the buildings have been there approximately 75 years longer than the cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac was actually built sort of around the site, hence its peculiar sort of shape. So, but they are the site boundaries.
Well, that was a very helpful intervention. Thank you very much
No problem.
indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think officially you need to return to your previous seat, having sanitised your mic. And of course, you may be called again. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Garthwaite, please.
Yes, I just want to have a few confirmations. Some of my questions have already been covered by others. I'd like to say we have a similar facility in my ward, which is in the middle of a residential area, and I'm not aware of any problems that have ever arisen as a result of that. And it is a residential area where there are children, there's a nearby school, etc. Very, very similar. And indeed, there's quite a high concentration of parking as well. So in terms of that, I think that a well-managed facility of this type is not necessarily a problem. I take the point that a care home would probably have more visitors and require more parking issues. I've read with interest the profile of who goes to such a facility, and the fact that they go there voluntarily. And I just want to ask whether there is, in fact, any record of such facilities causing problems in neighbourhoods that we're aware of, or whether this is a fear that is perhaps unfounded.
Well, David, I think you have covered part of that in the report. So if you'd like to elaborate on that, we'd be grateful.
In all honesty, I'm not sure I really can elaborate. I'm not aware of there being many of these facilities in the sort of area, and off the back of that, I've not also heard of any particular problems. So I'm sorry, I'm not able to sort of shed more light on that really.
There is a reference in the report, I think, that says that there is no correlation between provisions of this kind and crime, certainly. But yeah. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got quite a lot of questions, largely because I think the report is a bit thin on detail. So I don't know if you'd like me to ask them all or go through them.
How about taking them in groups of 3 then, please, Councillor
Lamb? Well, first of all, with regard to the planning history on page 15, it would be helpful, and if we could note this for future reports, it would be useful to have some dates on it, so that we can, because I'm deducing from the report the flow of things, but it'd be useful to know the dates of the planning history and if we know why those things haven't been enacted. And as part of that question, I'd also be interested to know what originally the buildings were and what they were for originally.
Okay, are you going to?
I'll put they're linked, and there's a.
Okay, fine, thank you, David.
Noted in terms of dates. Yeah, that's a bit of an error. They normally do go in, to be fair. In terms of the planning history, I think the situation on this particular one is it's such an old building that it predates planning records. So I guess the nature of the uses that have taken place over the years fall more into the sort of industrial, whether it's sort of dirty industrial or more light industrial, we're not entirely sure. But we've always attributed it to an industrial with an element of offices from the most recent activity. So it's one of those sites that's been there for so long that it's just continued in various uses. And then we've just dealt with a change of use application on that basis.
Okay, can I ask if the applicant is the same for each of these applications on the planning history?
No, these are different applicant.
Thank you. And then I was hoping, I don't know if you're in a position to explain it, I'd like to understand how the unit would work in practice. So I'm assuming that there's a lot of assumptions in here and a lot of things which are based on understanding, but I'd like to know, given the tight nature of the site and the access to it, specifics about how it will work. So I'm assuming it's not a secure unit, so people can come and go as they please. I'm assuming they could have a visitor if they wanted. It says it should be by prior agreement, but how does that work in practice? Do staff stay on site overnight, or is it just residents? And then how do they access? Is it policed when people come and go, and so on? How long do residents typically stay in the facility? Is it quite a lot of churn? Is it for days, weeks, months, and so on? And then linked to that, a concern I have is there seems to be a real lack of amenity for the residents. If you're coming to, it's called a recovery centre, where do they go for exercise, recreation? There's no garden or anything for them to, it looks like the intention is they'll spend their time in their room and in communal areas in the building. So there's quite a few there. I've still got a couple more, but if you could come back on those things, please.
David, you're welcome to tackle that, but we do have the applicant here as well who may wish to give more detail on that. So if the applicant would like to come forward, Mr. Fernley? Yeah, would you like to come forward to the same seat that your colleague took? And David, if you want to start.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that a number of those particular questions, perhaps more for the applicant in terms of day-to-day running. Just on the point of sort of the amenity space, it's true that, yes, there's not a great deal of space in terms of communal rooms, etc. But there are, I guess they're more generous than the care home use proposal, because it's largely the same layout. But there is also a relatively modest external sort of terraced area. But I'm sure the applicant will elaborate in terms of whether they're just on-site, off-site,
So could you address the issues Councillor Lamb has raised, please, Mr. Fernley?
Good afternoon. So my name is Simon Fernley. I am the applicant, and I was actually the previous applicant for the residential care home as well, although that wasn't noted. I decided to change use of this basically because I am myself a recovering alcoholic, and it's a cause that's very close to my heart, is this. And in answer to a lot of the questions that were raised there, it is a recovery centre, a privately funded recovery centre, and albeit it may seem that it's very sort of crammed in things, people do tend to spend a lot of time within the centre themselves, not necessarily in the rooms, but we have a intervention space where most of your day is taken up actually in counselling and sessions when you're not actually in the room, which a lot of people do spend a lot of time in the room. We do have organised supervised walks, whereby on a lunchtime after lunch, we do take people out as a group, which is supervised. Regarding the policing of it, yeah, we don't actually have staff that live there, but we do have a constant 24-hour staff rotation, whereby through the day, obviously there's counsellors in as well as the managers, etc. And then on an evening, it swaps over and we have a full staffing level on it as well. What was the other question? Sorry.
I think there was one about how frequently the stays of the people who
So
live there.
It's difficult to say that because recovery is based on yourself. Indeed, some people will only stay a minimum of a fortnight. Other people may be there up to 3 months, depending on indeed how they recover. You know, we have no way of saying how well people and how quickly people will recover. It'd be great if we could get everybody on a 2-week period and wait a magic wand and they were repaired and back out again, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. So the length of the stay is based on everyone's own individual recovery. Regarding the visitation, I know it was mentioned and previously, it is a non-visitors policy. Basically, we have once a week on a Sunday afternoon where we will allow people to come and collect their loved ones if they want, etc., and spend some time with them, and then they'll be returned to the facility. It is an open door policy. We're not going to lock people in. It's not a prison. But the golden rule in all rehabs, and indeed the one that I intended, is if you wish to leave that facility and walk out the front door, you will not be admitted back in again as part of the recovery program. We have to monitor who's going frequently in and out due to the fact that people, could be picking up alcohol, and indeed they're all tested when they come back in again to make sure they've not been drinking or anything else.
Thank you. Alan, do you want to come back or have you got different questions?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. I was kind of wanting to, while you're there, I wonder if you can help a little bit with the history and just understanding why the previous consents haven't been enacted over the.
On the residential?
Yeah.
On the residential care home? Well, basically, we got the planning through for the residential care home and we looked into starting it. And unfortunately, that's when I personally, as the applicant and the guy that was going to be building it all, ended up down the path of alcohol. So unfortunately, it never got pushed forward on that lines. And then when I ended up in recovery, that's when I decided to sort of change the use of it to something that was better suited for the current situation of alcoholism, really. So it was a cause for me, to my heart more than anything else on that.
Sorry, my last question. So do you have a track record of delivering a facility like this? Would it be you that's running it, or is there a particular company that's going to run it?
No. So no, we're running it ourselves based on using a structure of people now, which we've managed to get on board through different counselling, private counsellors and people in this industry who were indeed in previous rehab centres and that. So we're building a structure, and albeit it will be our concern, I personally won't be running it. No, I'd like to be involved in it, but we'll be putting the correct staff in to actually run the centre and make sure that it's done correctly.
Okay, Councillor Lamb.
So I do have another one on that. Sorry. Are you satisfied about the viability of it? How does the finances stack up?
Yeah, we've done all the research into that, and the finances do stack up on it. Albeit, like we said before, it's more the facility and putting something in place to help people that's closer to my heart, really. And indeed, we'd like the building to be, to be used for something like this. So but it does stack up. It will pay for itself without a doubt. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton, and then I'll come back to Councillor Garthwaite.
Right, thanks. My question is regarding the latest objection that mentioned the alleyway and mugging. I was just asking, will it be fully lit and will there be sort of CCTV there? Probably not in the alleyway itself, but be picked up from the building to address that issue. So I'd like that to be addressed, please. And then I'd just like to say that there is a unit like this in Middleton for women, and it's in an estate. I visited it, and it's exactly like you explained. They don't have visitors. However, on Sunday, if it's arranged, their loved ones can come and take them out and bring them back, and they're all on a time, etc. And yes, they are allowed to leave, and if they leave of their own free will, they're not allowed to come back. But there's been brilliant stories from there. A young lady being an alcoholic from the age of 14 to 21, and now she has done a PhD and gone on. So it's some wonderful stories from there. So I like that sound of what's going to happen there.
I'm sure that was a comment, but there was a question at the beginning. Okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that?
I'll just make some initial comments and then maybe the applicant could add. The representation doesn't say which alleyway and it talks about plural. So it seems to be suggesting a wider issue. So it couldn't necessarily be pinned down to a particular alleyway. The way I took it was that clearly it couldn't be Hopewell Terrace because that's a cul-de-sac. And I wouldn't necessarily refer to Chapel Lane as an alleyway. There are alleyways to the north that serve the school, etc. It may be those particular areas. In terms of the proposal, there's certainly no sort of functional link with Chapel Lane. The main entrance is on the cul-de-sac. So we're not necessarily seeking additional measures, but it may be that the CCTV serving the actual use itself.
You want to add anything, Simon?
Yeah, so I was a little bit confused myself when they mentioned alleyways, because there is no alleyways around where we're building it. There is indeed a walkway which goes through down to an estate around off the top of Church Lane, but that's Chapel Lane, sorry, that's nothing to do with ours. As far as the lighting and the CCTV goes, and we have every intention of lighting every aspect of that building up and the CCTV, and indeed have spoken to the Methodist Church across the road, who are currently struggling with people congregating around the back of their building on the night, which private land, and agreed that we'll light that and put extra cameras on. So we've no issues at all, and we find it a bit. It must be a separate issue, the council issue, with to what someone's referring to with alleyways, because they're certainly not around where we are.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? So I've got Councillor Lamb and Councillor Garthwaite. Councillor Lamb. My apologies. I'll take Councillor Garthwaite first.
Thank you. Yes, I echo what Councillor Hamilton has just said about the good results that are often found from such facilities. But I was wondering how you expect the demand to be. Is there a lot of demand for facilities like this, or might there be a danger that you would open and then find that the accommodation is lying empty and it would all fail?
So obviously we've done extensive market research into this factor, and indeed there is a document that's been produced which was on the portal, which shows the demand at the moment for this current pandemic, effectively alcoholism, which is rife at the moment. So we have no issues about having people in the rooms. The building certainly won't become vacant. In fact, we often worry that it's going to be overcrowded, because I know for a fact that when my wife was looking to find me somewhere to go into rehab, that luckily was able to do it privately, but everywhere was absolutely full, and this was back in 2018. So the time I was in there was a constant flow of people. So there is a massive demand at the moment for this, and this is one of the reasons why we're putting this forward.
Okay, that's all right, Councillor Garthwaite. Yep. Councillor Lamb, and then I have seen your indication, Councillor Sharp.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to ask at the time. I wanted to ask about the construction process and access, given the nature of the site, and quite how that's going to be managed, and what conditions can be put in place to make sure that it's not overly disruptive to the residents.
Yeah, as part of the recommendation, and I appreciate it's only headlines, but condition 6 relates to construction hours. So typically we would say 8 o'clock till possibly 5, 6 o'clock weekdays. Half a day Saturday is fairly typical in a residential area. And condition number 7, it relates to construction management plan. So again, included as part of that would be to make sure that things like materials and service vehicles are all stored on site and not blocking up the cul-de-sac essentially. So we'll secure those further details by condition.
So how can we ensure that works in practice? Because I've been victim, as I suspect many around the table have, of such conditions where construction shouldn't start before 8, but that means the delivery are sat on the street waiting at 7 o'clock with their engines running, etc., etc. So how can we make sure it's actually enforced? And also, we haven't touched on climate emergency, which doesn't feature in the report, and what the building is going to do to make sure it's meeting its carbon reduction targets.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it does just become an enforcement matter. We can agree the details, and then it's for applicants to comply with those details. And ultimately, if they don't comply, the compliance team would get involved, and there are measures, including temporary stop notices, etc., that can be served in serious situations. So, you know, we couldn't not put a condition on because we're worried that they won't comply with the requirements of the condition. That would sort of not be appropriate. We just rely on applicants saying they'll do what they've signed up to do, and if they don't, we then have the recourse of enforcement action. In terms of, sorry, your second point was, oh, climate emergency, sorry, yeah. In terms of the scale of this particular proposal, it doesn't fall within the major category. So the EN policies technically don't bite. I guess what you would say in terms of the context of the application, though, it's a reuse of a historic building. So there's carbon savings to be made in that respect. And going back to the original proposal, and apologies, I sort of misrepresented it, that it wasn't the applicant, because sorry, I didn't remember the applicant was involved with the previous scheme. Originally, the proposals have been to demolish the building and start again. And part of it was some of the points you alluded to about trying to get a bigger building on there, because a lot of it is often about finances. But we pushed very hard to retain these buildings and adapt them. So I guess as part of that, there are some sustainable credentials that go with that as well. I don't know if there's anything specific that the applicant's intending to do on other measures, but the policies don't necessarily formally bite because of the scale of the building.
Do you wish to comment, Mr. Fernley?
Yes, actually I do. So we looked at this as a job on the whole, and what you just said there, we looked and we said, how are we going to construct this? How is this going to work in obviously such a tight access area and out here? And one of the major things is that the building itself, as you said, is retaining its foundation as a building. So it's effectively a refurbishment with some new roofing bits going on it. And we have an electrical contracting business, which is not far from this in the same village of Kippax. So what we're going to do with it is to get all the goods delivered direct to our premises at the electrical contracting, and we have a smaller transport vehicle then, a flatbed, which we will take the goods up to the yard as and when required, so that there are no deliveries going direct to this project. We will transport them and ferry them as we need up there. So it will just be one vehicle that's taking the things up there. As far as the carbon offset, yeah, obviously we're electrical mechanical contractors. There's lots of things within the new building which, you know, will be carbon friendly. So we've taken all that into consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. My questions to Mr. Fernley, that's okay. Your vision of use of the unit, do you feel that the outside relaxing space is big enough for 16 residents?
Sorry, Nicole, could we just ask you to do a little nearer to your microphone? We're a long way away from you, so we need a bit more volume.
Just in terms of the outside space, do you feel that in your vision of the use of the unit that it's large enough for 16 residents?
I feel that it will never ever have 16 residents sat in it. Through my history of rehab, and indeed a lot of friends of mine who've been in different rehabs, there will never actually be 16 people sat out there at once, because people will be in different parts of the building. It's unfortunately it's a thing in recovery that there's a lot of sleeping involved, there's a lot of counselling. You won't ever really get 16 people sat out there. The facility that I was in held 22, I think, and I don't think there were ever more than 4 or 5 people out at once, because people are in there in different stages of recovery. Some people are in there initially that are going through, you know, a drug program to get off the alcohol. Some of them at the end of it going out. Some of it. So it to a degree, there'll never be that people. But indeed, there will be seating for 16 people if they need to go sit out there.
Okay, thank you. I am becoming aware of the time because unfortunately we are limited. So could we move now to comments, please? Are there any comments from members? Goodness me, I can't see a single. Oh, Councillor Nash.
Right. Well, when I saw the plans, my immediate reaction is that it is rather tight, is this this site. And where I live, I do have a care home for people with mental health issues, and it is absolutely brilliantly run. So I've no worries at all about this facility being provided in a residential area, except that, as I said, I think the access is very tight. But as has been explained and as it is written in the report, planning permission has already been given for a care home, which would have more vehicles attending, and probably a much greater need for garden space. So I think we are in a cleft stick here, as planning permission has already been given for a similar facility. I think we've no alternative but to approve this today.
Are you proposing the recommendation, Councillor Nash? Or indeed, would anyone like to? Councillor, I did see Councillor Lamb's indication first for a comment, and then I'll come straight to you, Councillor Garthwaite.
Yeah, well, I think I've no concerns, to echo others, about the use of and the purpose, but I have some concerns about the design layout. The two principal issues for me are the highways issues and accessing the building, and the amenity for residents on site, which I just don't think is sufficient. How those things can be resolved, I don't know. Like Councillor Nash, I can't see any planning reason really for us to refuse the application today. But I do wonder if there's scope to try and allay some of the residents' fears and concerns that I have about that lack of amenity, and really making sure there isn't a conflict with the rest of the traffic movements on the street. The access just looks tight to me.
Who would like to respond to that comment? Mr. Fernley, or would you like your architect to respond? Yeah.
I'd like Mr. Bailey, if possible, to
Mr.
come
Bailey.
and speak.
Sorry, Mr. Bailey, would you
Thank
like
you.
to come forward again? I think you'll have to wipe the mic again.
Are we on? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the highways, we've had sort of extensive sort of negotiations with the highways for, it seems like years literally now, sort of going backwards and forwards, looking at the provision of what we need on there. The highways officer's satisfied with it. There's further conditions suggested for sort of, you know, putting double yellows down the street. You know, it is a tight site. It's an urban site. You know, it's as big as it is. It has adequate parking. It's got adequate service provisions. It's just, I think it's just one of those sites where it is tight, but it's adequately tight. As to what else we could do, you know, I'm not quite sure really, but you know, we have satisfied sort of highways with those details. Again, in terms of amenity, as Simon alluded to, the amenity is adequate. And, you know, as Simon suggested, you know, clients can still go off-site, so they can still, you know, go visit parks or whatever as well under sort of supervision. So, you know, there's more than sort of adequate amenity space there, really. I guess the question sort of back to you really as to what do you think extra we would need to do.
David's asked to come in, so I'll ask you to come in at this point, David, if you would.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to, just picking up on Councillor Lamb's point, I think really my understanding, one of the main objections from local residents is really to do with the highways implications and the nature of the road and the potential busyness of the facility that's proposed. I just wanted to remind members, of course, we are suggesting an additional condition about details of a scheme to control on-street parking, which will be in respect of a management plan for visitors coming to the site and how the car park is managed and how access is managed. And also picking up on Councillor Latty's point, we'll go back also looking at the applicants made a commitment about separate pedestrian access into the site to avoid conflict between vehicles and pedestrians when they're entering the site. So I think members, if you regard it in that context, yes, it is a constrained site. There's limited amount that we can do. It is what it is in terms of the amenity space, and we've heard from the applicant and from the architect on that point that they both consider it's adequate, serve the needs, and it is very similar to the 2017 or 2018 planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, if I could make a comment myself, I can quite see why residents would be concerned about the traffic situation and the narrowness of the access and so forth. But as we've all said, it's already been approved on a previous application, and therefore to turn it down now would seem rather futile. And from my personal view, weighing its function against those disadvantages, I would see its function would win out. And for me, the weight of the application would be that this is a good development. That's my view. Councillor Garthwaite, are you still prepared to propose the recommendation?
Yes, I'd like to propose the recommendation, Chair.
Do I have a seconder at all?
I'm happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hamilton. So we can now actually vote rather than going round in a circle. All of those in favour of the recommendation, please. Debbie?
I think that's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, folks. That's passed and done. David, would you like to summarise?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm then, the members have resolved to grant planning permission subject to the conditions set out on page 13 of the report and the papers, and also subject to an additional condition about details of a scheme to control on-street parking. And we'll also look at the provision of separate pedestrian access into the site as part of the grant.
Thank you very much indeed. And in view of the time, I think we'll move straight on, see if I can get the item number right this time, to item 8, the conservatory, which, just to remind people, I know you've read the report, is here simply because it would have been dealt with under delegation, but it happens to be the property of a member of our staff.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it's actually two members of staff, Lisa and Tim Hart, one employed in our compliance section and one employed in our city centre team. This may draw some comment in terms of the quality of the plans I'm just about to show you. But as the Chair has explained, this is, from an officer perspective, it's a very straightforward proposal. It would ordinarily be granted granted and dealt planning permission under delegated authority. That is because it complies with our planning policies and the guidance set out in the Householder Design Guide. It is an application. They're replacing an existing conservatory and putting up a single-storey extension in its place. It's a semi-detached house. If we could go to the next slide, please, Toby. There's the location plan. You can just see the site outlined in red at the top of the plan there. Next plan, please. Toby, thank you very much. If you look on the left-hand side of that slide, as you look at it, that's the existing situation. The property we're talking, because it shows the whole or both pairs as or both parts of the semi-detached, is that bit to the right-hand side, as it were, where the details shown on the conservatory. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the proposal. So you can see it's broadly similar in terms of its height and its width, and its footprint is almost identical to the existing conservatory. The plans don't necessarily show this, but it is a brick dwelling, and the proposal is that the extension will be built in matching materials. Next slide, please, Toby. These just show the various elevations. Again, the left-hand side of the slide shows the existing position, and the right-hand side shows the proposed position. Next slide, please, Toby. Here we have an aerial shot. You'll see the application site. There's a red dot with 45 plane tree croft identified there. You can see two conservatories coming off the back of the pair of semi-detached houses there. The one that we're concerned with is the more rectangular one, and it comes up a slightly lighter colour. And the darker one with the hexagonal roof form is the conservatory of the neighbouring property. Next slide, please, Toby. This is the front of the property. Our property, as it were, is the one to the left-hand side. You see the white door there, and it extends further left to where the white garage door is. The bay window to the right of the white door and the first floor window above is part of the neighbouring property. Next slide, please, Toby. So here we just see the rear. The main focus of that photo is the existing conservatory, which would come down. And you can see the neighbouring conservatory with the blinds in the window just to the left on the far side of that timber fence. Next slide, please, Toby. This is a view from the side of the existing conservatory looking out across to the detached neighbouring property towards number 43. And there you can see it looks across through the fence into the middle part, as it turns out, of their rear garden. I suppose it's a point to note that when you look at the elevations, you compare the conservatory to the proposed single-storey extension, both have glazing facing this way, so there's no real change in terms of overlooking. It's almost maintaining the status quo. Next slide, please, Toby. And there we are, talking about glazing. There's the glazing in question. So that's the conservatory as it exists at the present time. And I think that's the end of the presentation. Yes. So if we could just go back in terms of the slides, just to say it's a 3-metre depth projection. That accords with our householder design guide. We don't have any objections from any of the neighbouring residents. Ordinarily, this may well actually have been constituted permitted development, but there is a condition on the original planning permission for the whole of the estate, which has taken away those permitted development rights. So that's why we've got the application in front of us. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No questions? Are there any comments? My comment is that I can't see any harm in this application whatsoever, and it's only slightly different from what exists there. So I'm looking to colleagues to propose the recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Garthwaite. All of those in favour? And that again is unanimous. Debbie, thank you very much. Do you want to sum up, David?
Thank you very much. Planning permission granted in accordance with the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And that does bring us to the end of our agenda, 15 minutes ahead of time, which is great. Thank you all very much for coming in person, and it's been very nice to see you all in the flesh. Thank you very much, and see you next time. And thank you again to colleagues for substituting.
Chair, can we just make a note of the date and time of the next meeting?
Yes. Do you want to do that? Thank you.
Yes, the date and time of the next meeting will be Thursday, the 22nd of July at 1:30, and hopefully we'll be all back here in the Civic Hall.